Gold.
I know.
Gold.
I wasn't recording your voice. So, all right. We might be able to use some of that.
It's
Let's do it
fine.
backwards.
Dub it. You can dub it.
Look like a Japanese anime. I'd watch that though.
It would be good.
I mean, most of us are watching in our toilet with the captions.
Yeah, that's
on.
right. That's right.
All right.
Okay. So why jump into development? Why do this? So one of the reasons that we decided to jump in and do this, and we, I mean me and my wife, and jumping in with Robert and other partners, is that we've been doing transactions for investors in the Valley, small multifamilies and single families, for about 8 years, and we've done hundreds of them. And it's gotten to the point where I think that we have some good processes in place, and we've kind of got a machine rolling, and that's great. I think that we have done a great job of servicing our client, finding great deals, negotiating great deals, and managing them well. But we're constantly telling new clients that in order to get into this game, they have to stretch, and they're going to have to take on some risk, and they're going to have to do some things they're uncomfortable with. And it kind of felt like it had been a little while since our team had done that. And so I felt like it was a pretty good opportunity for us to jump in and take some of that same risk, take some of that advice that we've been giving our clients, and learn something new and stretch and do some new cool things. And so that's one, is it just felt like it was a good opportunity to learn and try something new and stretch ourselves a little bit. The other is the city of Boise completely revamped their zoning code about 1.5 years ago. And they did that because there's serious affordability issues in Boise. It's really difficult for people to buy their first home. If you don't have a high-paying job, reserves, some cash, it's tough to get into a home now for a lot of people. We've experienced so much growth and so much equity growth, and although wages here have come up a little bit, they haven't come up at the same rate that equity and real estate costs has come up, and it's made it really difficult for people to get started. I bought my first house almost 25 years ago as a college student. I had a full-time job and I was going to school full-time, but I bought a house on an FHA loan by myself, and I think that's probably an impossibility for most people now. And so one of the drivers for me is being a part of the solution here, creating affordable housing for more people, and it's simply a supply and demand issue. And the more supply we can bring onto the market, the more affordable it will be, and the more opportunity there will be for people to jump in the market and buy their first home and grow their own nest egg.
Okay, how do you choose a property to decide to create new housing on?
So there's a lot of different ways that you can evaluate a property, and the concept that we're talking about is finding the highest and best use of a property. And the number one thing that you can do as somebody who wants to learn more about this or get into it is study the zoning code. It's fairly straightforward. You can go as deep as you want into it. I know that the full zoning code is hundreds and hundreds of pages, but for every different zoning designation, there's an executive summary that's just a few pages long that will give you a really good idea of what is allowed and what's not allowed, types of density that you can include. And so just getting up to speed on that, on the City of Boise website, there is, or the zoning website, they have a different section with literally a one-pager with graph of exactly what's allowed, the density that's allowed, the setbacks, the highlights of what by right is allowed to do with that property. And that makes it really simple to do a high-level analysis. And so, I mean, if you're somebody who's interested in developing or want to learn more about that or the process or what's allowed, a really simple exercise is just jumping on Zillow or Realtor.com and seeing what properties are available out there, how big the lot is, and going to the City of Boise and checking what's allowed in that zoning designation. So looking at the listing, then verifying the lot size and the zoning designation on the county assessor's website. And for us, it's Ada County. And then jumping onto the city website if it's within the city limits of Boise, and looking and seeing what's available there. But that's kind of how we started with this deal. It was a family friend of yours, and you brought it to me. We started looking at the possibilities, just doing exactly that same thing, looking at the county website to see how it was zoned and what was possible there. And then we did a little bit more research to see that all the properties surrounding this one were zoned with a higher density allowed. And so one of the cool things that a lot of government agencies have that do building and zoning and code enforcement, that sort of thing, that people don't know, is a lot of them have help desks. And so if you're analyzing a deal that you think might be a development possibility, if you feel like you need help or some questions and you don't have anybody to go to, you can literally walk into City Hall here and sit down at a desk without an appointment and talk to a planner and say, hey, I'm looking at this property. What is possible there? And the city of Boise in particular is really good about giving you a list of possibilities, and even coming up with ideas that might be a stretch. And for instance, the one that we're doing, we're working on a rezone right now because everything around there was zoned differently, and the zoning designation for this particular lot didn't really make sense for where it was, and the city agreed when we went and had that conversation with them, and so they're supporting our rezone as well.
How do you fund a project like this? How do you make a project work?
Well, the easiest way to fund a development like this is just your own cash, right?
Yeah.
If you've got $10 million in the bank, you can use that and build whatever you want. But if you're like Robert and I, and maybe you're just a few bucks short of that $10 million, right, almost there. There are a lot of different ways that you can do it. You can bring on private partners. So if you know people, have people in your circle that have reserves and they want to jump in, you can partner up with them as general partners. And so in a situation like that, those general partners would have a say in how the development goes and how and when you might cash out on a deal. Or another option would be what we're doing in syndicating funds. And that is going out to people and advertising the fact that you're building a development and that you want to bring investors on. And there's a million different ways you can structure it. It's almost like, if anybody's familiar with the way that people structure owner carry deals with residential homes, if somebody owns a home free and clear, you don't have a bank involved, and so the sky's the limit. And you can kind of set up a syndication the same way. You could have returns and equity traded for shares in your project in any way that you want, as long as everybody agrees to it. It's contractual, it's on paper, then you can do it any way that you like. The way that we have ours structured is that everyone who invests in this syndication that we're working on for Arch Street, they get what's called a preferred return of 8%. And that means that they make the first 8% profit on the deal before Robert or I, as the developers, get paid anything at all. And so that's one way that we've tried to encourage people to get involved through syndication is offering them a preferred return and aligning our interests in that we don't make money until all the investors make their money. So that's another way. Beyond that, I mean, you can get really creative. There's a lot of different types of loan products out there. You're not going to get a conventional Fannie or Freddie Mae for a loan for a development. And so talking to different commercial lenders and lenders who do build jobs, there's all kinds of products out there. You're not going to be able to come in without any equity and get 100% financing on something like this. But there are interesting ways you can structure equity that you might have in the land or somewhere else that you could leverage to get a loan and build something out like this too. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that.
What makes Arch Street a great project? Like why invest here?
Oh, well, there's a lot of reasons that I think Arch Street is a great project. For one, we are bringing on a really amazing team. And I mean, to be frank, we're not incredibly experienced developers. This is something that's relatively new to us, but we have a lot of connections in the Valley. We know a lot of people, and we've been able to leverage some of those relationships to bring on some really experienced people on the team. And so the fact of the matter is that as the general partners in this, although we're kind of directing the process, we're really just kind of pushing paper. We have an entire team of very experienced architects, civil engineers. We have a general contractor that's incredibly experienced, has built more multifamily units in this valley than anybody else. And we're meeting and talking with them regularly, several times a week, to plan and keep things moving along. And so one of the reasons that I think that this is a great project is because we have this amazing team that's built up. It's one thing to look at this as that these are new investors and that's risky, and I understand why some people might feel that way, but we have enough experience in life and in business to know that it's important to build a team around you of very experienced people. So that's what we've done. Beyond that, that part of town I think is very unutilized. One of the reasons we're looking at this rezone is that there is multifamily and commercial development all around this lot. There's a small pocket neighborhood here that this Arch Street development is in, and most of the lots there are at least an acre. Some of them are several acres. This one that we have that we're working on right now is 1.3 acres, but all around there is significantly higher density. And in addition to that, it is less than a quarter of a mile away from USIC and 5 Mile. And It has everything you can need there. There's a gas station, there are restaurants, there's a grocery store, there's a bus stop right there. And so I think this fulfills a need in that part of town for not only higher density housing that's more affordable. Um, Ideally, at the end of this, there will be some for rent product, and that will be at an affordable price point. And then on the other end, there will be some for purchase product that's at an affordable price point too. Um, but anybody who lives and works in Boise, I think this would be a convenient spot because they could walk or ride a bicycle to every amenity that they would need, and with public transportation a couple hundred yards away, if they work downtown or in Canyon County, wherever the case may be, they can hop on a bus and get where they need to be. So from a location standpoint, it's fantastic. It kind of fulfills a lot of what we're trying to do as people who love Boise and want to fulfill a need here, and honestly what the city's trying to do too, in creating neighborhoods that are self-sustaining.
Let's try to keep the answers down to like 90 seconds because it feels,
Yeah, I tend to talk a lot.
What about, what's the process? How do you go from start to finish, just each part of the steps of the process?
Well, first step is just getting out there and looking at deals and what's available and seeing if there's a possibility. So step one is just looking at properties, jumping online, underwriting deals at a very high level. I mean, you can forget about the cost of building and the cost of financing and all those things for step one. Find a property that you think might be able to be developed, verify the zoning and the lot size on city, county, and city websites, and then see what's possible. I mean, just right there, you could look at a single family home and find out in 3 minutes if a lot can be split, how many times it can be split, can I put multifamily here, could it be used in a commercial way, could a retail store be here? You could find all that out in just a couple minutes by doing those things. And so anybody who's interested in developing, I would just get really good at looking up those websites and getting a good feel for what's possible.
Second step.
The second step would be either reaching out to the seller or a listing broker, or if you have your own broker agent, reaching out to them and getting a feel for what that seller's looking for. I think especially on the commercial side, when you're looking at commercial properties, so that means apartment buildings of 5 units or more, anything that's retail, industrial, anything like that, a lot of times there are sellers that are experienced and open to the idea of financing or partnering on deals. And so that's typically the best place to start, is through whatever channels you have available to you, reaching out to that seller and saying, hey, what's your situation? What are you looking for in an offer? And trying to get a feel for if they're interested in either carrying a note for you or possibly participating as a partner in a development.
Okay. Step 3.
Step 3 is once you've had those two conversations, step 3 would be going down to the city and sitting down at the planning desk. If you haven't done that already, sitting down at the planning desk and you just say, hey, I'm in conversations with this property. I would like to develop something here, and by the time you get there, you should have already done some preliminary due diligence, and so you should have a good idea if you can do a mixed-use development, if it's a residential development. The best tip I can give people about talking to the city is, rather than saying, here's what I would like to do, is that okay? Is sitting down with them and saying, what's possible on this lot? I'm looking at this land, and I would like the city to help me decide what the best use of this land would be. And I think people would be surprised at how eager the city will be in 2 ways. Number one, I think all the people in planning in our city have been trained to be open-minded about possibilities. But the other is those are experts, and it kind of strokes their ego. They like the idea of being able to sit down and say, hey, be creative and help me understand what's possible here, and using some of their skills.
Okay, so after you talk to the city, what's next? Negotiating the deal?
You got to negotiate the deal, yeah. The next thing would be negotiating the deal, and ideally, you've got a bunch of equity in the deal that the seller has, and you can negotiate some way for them to work with you on financing that equity. I've been really surprised a lot of times. 98% of the time, you may not end up with a killer deal or terms that are amazing, but 2% of the time you might, and you won't know if you don't ask. My typical way that I go about that is I always call and try to find out as much as I can about the seller's situation, the ownership of the property. Sometimes there are handshake agreements on the back end for equity or sales that you may not be able to tell right off the bat. So figuring out exactly where they are, where they want to go, and figure out if you can offer pricing and terms that are fair to everybody. Every once in a while, if I'm just getting a lot of pushback in a situation like that, just for the heck of it, if it's something I'm really interested in, I'll just throw an offer at them with the terms that I like and see what kind of response I get. Sometimes you'll get a counter. On very, very rare occasions, they'll sign your offer and send it back. You just never know until you put it on paper.
Okay. So you get under contract, and then due diligence on the property at that point, right?
Oh, that's the exciting part. Yeah, due diligence. So you got to do your due diligence, and if you're going to be fundraising, then that all needs to be done before you start asking people to jump in on the project. You need to have a clear path to where you're going and a good idea of what that's going to cost. So due diligence, the biggest thing that I've learned is right-of-way and utilities. And the first thing you need to do is make sure that all the utilities that you need are available there, that they have the capacity for the density that you want, and also ensuring that the right-of-way, meaning the road that feeds this property, has the capacity for what you want to do, and that either improvements are there or improvements can be made within the budget of the project that you're working on. Sometimes the county ACHD will come out and require improvements that you never thought of that are far beyond what you budgeted for. And so having some of those conversations earlier is pretty important.
And then talk about fundraising?
Sure, yeah. Once you have a good idea of what's possible and what your municipality will allow, figuring out how you're going to pay for it is the next step. And there's a lot of creative ways that you can structure it. And actually in the last year or so, I've learned a ton about different ways to structure these types of deals. With that being said, you could raise enough cash to complete a project if you wanted, but there's also the possibility of raising up enough money to do your entitlements, meaning that you're paying all of your architects, you're getting all of your permits set so that the place is ready to build. And once you get to that point, you can actually go to a lender and ask them for a loan to finish out the project. If you've built enough value and enough equity in a project, then you can get a loan without bringing more cash. And so if you're willing to put in the legwork and you find a deal where there's enough upside for the community and for your partners, you can do this without putting any of your own money in. But it'll take a lot of work, and you'll be out there stretching a little bit for sure.
All right. So you've raised the money, and then what's next? Entitlements, right?
Yeah, there's entitlements. I feel like I kind of danced around that a little bit already. I'm going to let you talk more about that because I would say you're much more of an expert than that.
Let's see. So you got entitlements, then you've got like design, build, sell, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep. Okay. So design could be a really fun part, especially if you're a creative person and you're really excited about offering a product to people that is going to feel and look good and be a part of the neighborhood. And that's a big part of it with what we're doing is you want to honor the neighborhood and the neighbors and make sure that you're improving that community. So working with an architect and a landscape architect, we've had a lot of luck with people that we know and have had relationships with that have jumped in and been really excellent partners for us. I would not consider myself a creative type, and so it's been kind of fun watching the architects and Robert work together on some of the planning and design and the way that things lay out and the way that they feel. It's been very interesting watching things get batted back and forth between the architects on the design side and the city, kind of seeing where we can define some of those hard and fast stops for the city on setbacks and where they may have some flexibility, and it's been really interesting. And there's some of the times that we didn't think we could do something, and the city actually came back to us and said, well, here's a way that you might be able to make that work. And so just participating in those conversations with the architects and the city and being a part of that entitlement process and seeing the ins and outs and where the city really wants to make things work. And I think that helps with future projects too, seeing where the city's willing to bend, what kind of projects they really want to push through, and that can kind of hone your underwriting for your next project as well.
Right. So after entitlements is in design, then you got the building phase.
I'm gonna let you talk about that too.
All right.
I can talk about like
Talk about
exits. Yeah, that's the fun part. So the exciting part really is talking about the different exit strategies. And I think a lot of lay people, when they talk about developments, they're thinking about somebody building a huge complex a big apartment building, a development, and they're holding on, and at the very end, they get this huge paycheck if everything goes well. Well, one of the fun things is that it doesn't necessarily have to be something you see through to the end. If you're building value all the way along, there are several opportunities for a developer to exit a project. And even if you jump on Zillow right now, you can look, and there's probably 20 entitled projects for sale in Boise, and that's where somebody bought a piece of land, they did the design work, they went to the city, they got all their permits approved, and now they're selling it as a project that's ready to go. And if you've done that, you can usually add quite a bit of equity and value to a piece of land by doing that work. And if you've got a good design and a good location, your ROI on that can be very, very good. So there's the opportunity to exit at entitlement and make some money there. You have another opportunity to do all the flat work, the horizontal after that. So you're bringing in utilities, doing all your concrete work, your parking, your streets, and it's ready for people to go vertical. You can sell that, and a lot of developers will exit a project then. And then, of course, you can build a project all the way out. And then once the project's completely built, there are multiple ways to go about it. When the project's completely built, you can talk with your investors, or if there's enough equity in the deal, you can refinance it, and you can return everybody's investments and keep that development within your collective portfolio, and you can use that to mitigate tax liabilities that your partners may have. You can get cash flow off of that. There's a lot of different opportunities once that ends. Also, the possibility, depending on how you've entitled the project, selling off units individually, condoizing units. And so if you're building an apartment building, that doesn't mean that all the apartments have to be owned by one person. In the city of Boise, they're pretty open to the idea of condoization, where you can sell each unit individually as a platted single family dwelling. And then we're talking about the opportunity also of making a part of the project a multifamily, where it would be platted as one and there'd be several apartments, and we could either sell that off to an investor or potentially refinance that, pay off the people who have invested in our syndication, and then keep that within a collective portfolio as well.
Okay. Last question. Who is a perfect investor as an LP in a development project?
Perfect investor. I wouldn't say that there's a perfect investor, but it's an opportunity for somebody to be involved in something that is a large-scale project that they wouldn't be able to do on their own. So I think that if I had to describe somebody who would be a really good fit, it's probably somebody who has a busy life and a decent income. A lot of people think in order to participate in something like this, you need to have millions upon millions of dollars, and that's not necessarily the case. If you have good income, a little bit of reserves, and you want a return on those reserves, but you want it to be 100% passive, a syndication is a great place for you to go. And part of the beauty of the syndication is when it's done and you've gotten returns on your initial investment, a lot of times you're going to have options to stay in that deal in one way or another and start mitigating some of your taxes as well. And so there's a lot of different opportunities in that way. Depending on the type of syndication, it's also a great place for somebody to dip their toes in if they're new to the real estate investing world. There are types of syndications out there where you don't need to be an accredited investor, and you can throw a few $1,000s at a project. Your risk is low, and you get to watch and participate in the process and see how it works from start to finish. And that could be a really good way to, kind of in a default way, almost to have an education, a free education about the process. Any indication or any syndication that you participate in, your general partners should generally be keeping you updated all along the way. They should be available to answer your questions. And by investing in those syndications, it's a really great way to get your foot in the door and have conversations with people who are out making things happen.
Great. All right.
You're a better interviewer than me.
I was part of a Faith Leaders Housing Symposium a couple years ago, and we were sitting around, and there was a lady there who's a houselessness advocate. And she was sharing that this number has stuck with me because it was so shocking to me. She told me that there are 4,000 kids in our school system in the Valley who don't have permanent housing. That number, like something in me was like, it was like this growl inside of me that said, that can't stay that way. Like I knew that because if you don't have housing, if you don't have a place to live, you can't build a life. You can't get a job without a permanent address. It's hard to get health care without a permanent address. It's really hard to access the sorts of things that you need, like building a community of friends and people that you share your life with. So for me, like creating housing isn't a business; it's a mission, and it's something that every city and every society has needed for all time is somebody to say how we're going to create the places where we're going to live and how do we build the infrastructure for those places. And I came by it kind of circuitously from the edges, but what I found is that housing is a very important part of everybody's life, and if I can contribute by helping create it for people, I think that it's a blessing to our city to have places to live. And in Boise, having a place to live is really good news because we have such low vacancy in our rental market and really not much inventory when it comes to for sale. So that's why.
Great. So, as a developer, how do you think that your work will impact those 4,000 children?
When I think about the housing crisis in our city, there are almost none of the people who need the end product can provide it themselves. With modern zoning codes and the International Building Code and all the HUD requirements, and even just the cost and time it takes to build a home today, on average, it takes over 1,000 hours of human labor, skilled human labor across 20 different disciplines to build a home. So almost none of the people who need it can provide it for themselves. And that means that somebody has to say, I'm going to be the orchestrator. I'm going to be the one who's going to take my time and my money and my passion and find ways to create housing out of underutilized spaces. And so that's one of the reasons I was drawn to developing was it was a skill set that I had, but also it ran with a big need in our city to create housing.
So there are a lot of people who live in Boise who aren't really excited about developments and people moving here. And in many cases, developers are kind of the big bad wolf, and those are the people that they're angry about. What would you say to those people about you as a developer and what you're trying to achieve?
The very first neighborhood meeting I had as a developer, I went into it saying, I want to hear from the neighbors what they think. And I was listening, and what I heard was, don't change my neighborhood. That was their real concern was, I like it the way it is. Boise's a great place. Why would we want to change what's happening here? And it's great if you're established. If you're wealthy or established, it's a place where you can create a life. But I was looking at my own kids, and I was seeing that over the course of 30 years, so my grandparents bought their home in the same neighborhood I live in 1952 for $25,000. In 1980, my parents bought their home 2 miles west for $50,000. And I bought a house in the same neighborhood 30 years later for $250,000. So it had doubled in 30 years. And then it went from double to 5 times over 30 years. And then my house then tripled in value in a 5-year period. And I was looking at it saying, my kids were going to live out in Eastern Oregon to be as close to Boise as they could afford if somebody doesn't have the foresight to say housing is an important part of our city. And so for me, yeah, people are going to move here. People have been moving here at an incredible pace my entire life. We're talking 3 to 5% of population growth every single year across the valley for 40 plus years. And so we can either develop enough housing so that our kids have a place to live, or we can become like San Diego, shut down all of the infill development that could happen, and then people are going to be driving an hour or 2 hours just to access the city. And I don't want to live in a city like that. So that's what I'm thinking about.
So with this modern zoning code, the city of Boise has increased density, and they're allowing for infill and developments that could not have existed a year ago. And as you mentioned, a lot of people feel like that is changing the city that they love. Going back to that example you gave about San Diego, when a city says, well, we're not going to allow that kind of thing anymore, what does that do to the people who already live there who may not already be established? How does that affect their lives and their families?
Yeah, so once you stop developing in an area, basically it becomes every year it becomes less attainable because there's an exponential increase in the valuation of homes as demand continues to increase, but the supply stays the same. So it starts out like this, and then it starts to, we're kind of like right here on the curve. But what happens if you don't keep developing and creating new housing? It hits this inflection point where all of a sudden only the very rich can afford to be within a 10 or 15-minute drive of downtown because there's no more new housing being created. And so that's one of the things I'm trying to say is like how can we create enough housing and the types of housing that people can start purchasing. So like there aren't starter homes being built across the valley. For the most part, if they are in the lower end of the cost spectrum, they're being built as for rent buildings. So whole neighborhoods that are built by huge private equity that are built to rent out rather than to sell. So when a friend of mine who's 30 says, I'm ready to buy a house, I've got $15,000 I've scrimped and saved, they can't find something for $300,000 or $400,000. The only way to do that now is to start thinking smaller and thinking, how can we, as a social good, create an on-ramp for people to get into the housing market? I think that's really important.
So a mutual friend of ours posted an article the other day that really got me thinking. I don't know if you read it, but it was about how any type of development will have a positive effect on entry-level housing. And so some of the complaints that we hear sometimes is that a lot of the stuff that's being built here is higher end. Can you talk about how even building higher end units can affect the entry level and availability of affordable housing for people?
Yeah, for the most part, when there's a really low vacancy and high demand for housing, it really doesn't matter what kind of housing it is. The price is going to spike because the availability is low. And so let's say somebody's able to afford, they take home $7,000 a month, they're able to afford a $2,500 a month apartment, but they can't find an apartment that's $2,500 that fits what they want. They're going to take whatever's available. And so that pushes down, and they will take a $1,500 apartment and increase the price to $2,000 because they're willing to pay it because of demand. But if at each step of the strata of cost, we're able to provide housing, that person then says, you know what, I'd like an apartment with more amenities. I'm going to pay an extra $500 and be in an apartment that fits my lifestyle better. And then it lowers the demand on this section, this strata, and creates more space for people to enter in. And so I know that we want to think of it like it's either this or this, but there's this whole spectrum of need and desire. And across the board, we have to be asking, what's the market demanding? And then trying to figure out a way to fill it. And you and I, we're pretty passionate about creating, we call it workforce or affordable housing, where we look at somebody who's close to the median income in our city, you know, the nurse, the teacher, the firefighter, the police officer, and could they, with a full-time job, afford a house? And that's going to be somewhere in the $350,000 to $500,000 range at current interest rates. We want to build into that space so that they have something available for them.
So tell us what you like about this Arch Street project specifically.
Arch Street's a great little project, partly because it's an underdeveloped part of the city. There's about 15 acres that are underdeveloped in that area, and so it's kind of like this last little vestige of open space. It's in an area that has been pretty honestly not expensive for a long time, and so I think it's an area where we could build inexpensive housing and it would fit in the neighborhood. I like that. I think it fits in that neighborhood. I think that it's with the zoning code rewrite and the city supporting a rezone, it creates a project that can not only return money to our investors, but it allows us to go from 15 or 16 units to 30 units on the project. And at 30 units, I think it will really create a nice little neighborhood effect, possibly with some third spaces for people to hang out. And those become not just a place to live for a few years, but a place to build a life. And that's the kind of property I want to build.
I know from a community and aesthetic standpoint, you're really excited about the history of this part of town. Can you talk to us a little bit about the history there and how you plan to connect this new community to who has been there before?
Yeah, so Arch Street is in an interesting spot. It is adjacent to the Eustic B Board, which was a part of this little township called Eustic, the town of Eustic. It was on the interurban railway that ran from downtown Boise all the way out to Ontario, actually. And people could take this little rail car system in between the cities. And Eustic was on the western edge of Boise, and it was its own town. And Harlan P. Eustic was this doctor who said, I'm going to create these orchards and I'm going to build a little bank. And he built this little town site. And it's been sitting there for 100 years now, 110 years. And it's been pretty, it's been swallowed up by Boise, but it's a spot where we want to kind of connect with the history. We want to say, okay, how can we use maybe some early 20th century architecture, maybe some like neo-colonial design aspects, possibly some like craftsman style homes, and connect it visually with this kind of old history to give it a cohesive idea for the neighborhood. And hopefully as it develops around it, they use some of those same cues as what we're creating in this space.
So on this project, we're knee deep in entitlements right now, but hopefully in the next 6 months or so, we'll be to a spot where we can break ground. Can you talk to us a little bit about the first steps in the construction process and kind of how that flows along until you have an actual building people can live in?
Yeah, so once you've worked through entitlements, you've got funding, a construction loan in place, you've got all of your permits done, then it's time to break ground. And what happens is it starts with an excavating team comes along and clears the ground, makes it all level, makes it a good site. And then they're going to do all the infrastructure. So there's a joint trench that's going to come along. You're going to put all your utilities in this joint trench. On Eustic site, we're probably going to bury some power lines. We're probably going to do some road work required by the highway district and prepare the site. This is called horizontal construction. It's all the stuff that happens at ground level or below. Once that's finished, then we bring in the concrete crews. They're going to prepare all of the roadways. They're going to make sure that we have not just the roadways, but also like the concrete along the sides, the curbing, the sidewalks that are required. And as soon as they're done, then we're ready to go vertical. And that's when we bring in the construction crews with concrete, framing, siding, roofing, kind of build the outside of the apron, the waterproofing of the house. Then we're going to bring in all of our trades. We're going to bring in electrical, HVAC, plumbing, and they're going to get everything ready. And then the finishes, the guys are going to come along and make it all pretty and beautiful and functional. And then at that point, we bring in all the inspectors. They say it looks good. And then we're ready to move to either a for rent or a for sale project, that's the fun part, is kind of watching it kind of come to life. Literally nothing was there. And after about 11 months, you're going to see something just come up out of nowhere.
So this project is going to take it's going to take space or take shape over the course of a couple different
Phases.
That's the word. So talk to us about why this project is rolling out in 2 phases and the pros and cons of doing things that way.
So in development, one way to increase the returns and make it have a lower equity requirement is to phase out the project. So in any given project, to get a construction loan, the loan to cost valuation, so like let's say the whole thing costs $3 million, you have to have about $1 million of equity in that project for them to loan you the other 2/3. So anytime you think 1/3 is equity, 2/3 is loan. And what that does is if you do one phase, after one phase, and if you're able to sell or rent it out, you have enough equity then to build the second phase with less money. And that means that everybody who invested in the project is going to make more money because we're reusing the capital. And possibly you can even return the capital from the first phase. And then it's kind of like an infinite return. You're using the equity you created from the first phase to build the second or third phase. And then all the money that's coming out of it is just profit to our investors. So we like to phase it out if it's possible. But some sites work better as a single construction, mostly because the exit point requires it to kind of finish all at once. And so we kind of weigh that based on the needs of the project.
So when we were talking about building things out, you mentioned you got to get construction financing in place, and then you were off on a roll. Talk to us more about the process of getting financing, getting approved, the different types of products that are available out there.
Yeah, I would describe getting construction financing as getting a root canal and a colonoscopy at the same time. It's pretty painful, mostly because you've got to have enough information that the project, and you understand everything that's going to happen with the project, what's needed for it, how much money it's going to cost, and you have to be able to demonstrate to a lending partner that you have the ability to repay, you have the team in place to get the job done, and that it's going to be profitable. So it's pretty complex. You've got to be able to put together a pro forma, and that pro forma is going to demonstrate that the project itself makes money. So this is a financial document that demonstrates here are the assumptions about what will happen along the process with this design, and here's how it's going to make money, and here's the valuation of the appraisal afterwards. Here's some comps that demonstrate that we know what we're talking about. So that pro forma is really important. And then you need to have, most of the time you need a guarantor on a project. So you and I are not independently wealthy. We are middle class people who do work in real estate. And so we need someone who will come along, and the bank will say, well, they have deep enough pockets that they can make sure that the project happens if there's contingency funding that's needed. And so a lot of times a sponsor will bring on a guarantor as a part of their team. Or in our case, we were able to partner with construction professionals who are able to come alongside of us as partner guarantors as well. So that's kind of the process. You get all your financials in. There's about 100 different documents you're going to send to them. There's 1,000 questions are going to email to you. And at the end, I just finished on Friday one of my projects. We got a $3.6 million loan, and it took me about probably 500 hours over the course of 2 years to get that loan. So we're there, though. And I probably talked to 6 different lenders in that course of that time. So, yeah.
You were in that one.
I did. Yep.
Okay, so let's assume that this project is going to go relatively smoothly. We know there can be bumps along the way. We're going to learn a lot of stuff along the way, but we make it to the finish line. Everything's built. We get a certificate of occupancy. What is the next ideal scenario for you? The project's done. What's an ideal situation to walk away from it?
For me, the ideal situation is we take our capital out. So all of our investors get their initial capital back to them, including me. Any money that we invest or time that we invest, we want to get that capital back because then we can reinvest in another project. My next hope is that from a tax perspective, I'm able to take maybe a unit or keep my equity in the project if we're able to have a long-term exit, because what that does is it builds long-term equity. And it also means that I don't have to pay taxes on the growth of the equity from this project. It's a beneficial project that way. But for me, then I want to scale up. I think that the more partners we have, the more projects we have, the less expensive the development process is, and then the more housing we're able to provide with infill projects. You and I, we probably analyzed 10 deals that would work every week in our city. It's just a matter of having time, partners, and money to go after them. So let's just scale up and go build more housing.
That's great.
All right.
I wanted